Well, good evening. This is Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. It's good to be back with you again this week. Um, just been reading a little bit out of one of my favorite authors, Man as God Intended, James A. Fowler. One of my, I like reading his books quite a deal, quite a lot. Well, this week we want to continue on from where we had to leave off last week when I was talking about spirituality, responsibility, and the nature of Scripture. And I want to make it clear, if I can, that when we're talking about this topic, it's a difficult thing to deal with when you're dealing with the Scripture in a manner where you're trying to be entirely honest. And the reason why this can be difficult is because there are people who are on various extremes, and the extremes tend to not listen. And if you tell something to an extremist, if you say something to them that they agree with, they think, "Oh my goodness, you're just on my side, and you're an awesome, wonderful person. We love you, we like you." You say something that they don't agree with, and they perceive you as on the other side, and you are just completely there. I find that sometimes, for example, if I offer some of my concepts and notions about different political philosophies, that I'm not really a conservative, I'm not really a liberal, but I find that many times when I say things that all the conservatives want to confuse me as if I were a liberal, and all the liberals want to confuse me as if I'm a conservative, because since they see I'm not entirely in their camp, I must be on the other side and must be one of them. And so when we're talking about the Scriptures, there are people who are on both extremes. We have people who want to believe that the Scriptures are this supreme sole authority, inerrant, perfect, plenarily, verbally inspired Word of God. And there's others who want to regard it as something that is just a phenomenon that men have been toying with and bringing up, and that it's just a useless book full of nothing but lies and errors. And so they either want to make this book something they hang around their neck, or they want to turn it into something they can just completely dismiss. And I don't think that either extreme really makes any good sense. The book does exist, and it is there, and it's very influential, and people who have been people of faith, no matter where their faith has been, have always found it to be a book of fabulous impact upon them. It is a book that resulted from the fact that there is this history in which is contained the appearance of Christ, where he comes to earth as part of what's going on. So we find ourselves wanting to find some way of dealing with the text. But I feel that being honest with it is an attempt to understand, what is it? What is it not? And trying to deal with it honestly. I find that many times believers will be people who, as they might be well-intended, tend to try to exaggerate the what they see as the goodness of God and the awesomeness of Scripture and things like this. And I think that sometimes they honestly mean well. There's this concept that if it is of God, then obviously it's just wonderful and perfect and has to be this. And in many ways, this is just a knee-jerk reaction of what people would anticipate would be true if it's of God. But I think that we don't learn from our history that I think that's exactly where the law came from. I think that centuries ago, millennia ago, that mankind as a race was at a place where it made sense to them that, well, if there's a God, then he's got to be unhappy with some of our behavior. He's got to expect more of us. And I think that they also knew that they were having a variety of difficulties and problems. And so obviously, if there was a God, he would have to have certain ideas in mind, and I really think that the law was an idea that made just a great deal of sense to ancient man. It doesn't work. They didn't know that. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but it doesn't work. I think in the same way now, doing some other kind of flip-flop to some other thing, and we just embrace it to the extreme, is an attempt to try to simplify life. in ways that it doesn't really need to be simplified. It's okay when life is sometimes even a little messy, sometimes a little confusing, sometimes challenging, filled with things that I don't know. What's wrong with that? It's not as if that makes life unmanageable or unlivable unless you're rigid or demanding or somehow you feel that reflects on you. So I think that some ways we as Christians have, even in defense of our faith, tried to turn our faith into something that's just awesomely amazing and beyond. But I think that there's a hidden price in that. And that is, I think that we have turned the Bible into something that can actually be quite abusive. What are some of the things that we notice about abuse? Do we know anything about abuse? Have we learned anything about abuse in the last 2,000 years? Well, I think we have, as we've observed abuse from governmental leaders. We've observed abuse from certain classes as they might abuse another class. We've learned ways in which one individual might abuse another. We've seen the abuse of slavery. We've seen the abuse of male chauvinism. We've seen just a wide varieties of different ways that human beings can abuse one another with authority and things like that. And I think that we're going to be honest, we're going to have to recognize some of these behaviors that are typically associated with abuse as part of sometimes our Christian doctrine in terms of who we claim God is and what we claim the Bible is. You know, think about it. There are a lot of people who like to interpret the Bible as something which is always talking to us about how we are just wicked, evil, horrible sinners, saved by grace. You know, the love of God is something that we have received so undeservingly, and that, oh my goodness, where would we be if it weren't for God's grace and mercy? We'd all be in hell exactly where we deserve to be. That's the message of abuse, if you stop to think about it. It's filled with this constant, unending, inescapable blame, but by a nice guy who's not going to hold it against us. And I think that we don't realize what we're walking into when we have that kind of a teaching. It's really not a good one. So we see here that we have frequent blame is often a characteristic of abuse. There are others, like many times the abuser will negatively label the object of abuse, be it another class, be it another person, be it a spouse, be it a child, be it an employee, be it whatever. The abuser likes to come up with a label. And the neat thing about a label is this. Once you have somebody under a label, it doesn't matter what they do or how they behave. The label defines them. Once you have the label, you don't need to use their behavior or their feelings or anything about them. You don't have to be real. You don't have to be honest. If you're a jerk, then anytime, if I can label you as a jerk, then anytime you say something that ruffles my feathers, I don't have to wonder if, oh, I'm sorry, did I offend you? Not that I should be jumpy and all that either, but if I just have labeled you as a jerk, then anytime you ruffle my feathers, I'm going to say, well, there you go. Again, you're just being another jerk, just being a jerk again, you know. Labels can become shortcuts to exempt me from having to think through any moment and understand it. Not to say that labels can't be useful in understanding behavior. I do think that labels are useful. In fact, to be honest with you, my concept of cognitive processing is that the human brain can't operate without, at some level, certain labels. We just have to realize that labels are labels, and people are who they are, and we can't confuse the categorization we have done to organize the world as if it's also the same thing as the world. And the labels that I might use to categorize an experience of a person might be helpful in understanding my experience of that person. In fact, I'm talking about abusers, and I've got to categorize some of this behavior. But I need to also maintain a certain openness to who people are. Truth is, even people who are abusers aren't always abusing. It isn't that thing that is, so it's even that is a label we don't want to necessarily just, well, yeah, that's what they are, and so that explains everything. So, but abusers do like to use the label and do like to stop at the label. And so we want to ask ourselves sometimes, is there any way in which we have been portraying God or portraying the scriptures that give to us a label that is negative? Did you know that the Bible nowhere ever refers to people who have faith as sinners? And yet, how many people say, well, I'm a sinner saved by grace? That is not an identity that the Bible identifies with. And so that, it's kind of a negative label that is even out of place. And yet there's a lot of theologies and a way of understanding God in the Bible that really embraces this. In fact, just as the abuser tries to make themselves look great and wonderful by putting you down, sometimes the well-intended saint of God will try to lift God up, myself down. That's a very false humility. In fact, I would tell you this about humility. Let me tell you something about myself. This might not sound very humble, but I like me. I think I'm awesome. I think I'm wonderful. I think that I have a value that is amazing. I don't think that's necessarily unique at all. I think that's just a part of being human. And if you're a human, I think you're awesome. I think you're amazing. I think the beauty of who it is that you are is beyond description. I don't think we can say enough about the awesome, wonderful beauty of being human. I don't think we can. So where do we get humble? Well, everyone's that way. It's not as if I'm better than anybody else. And in fact, when we take a look at our God, well, I can't create billions and billions of stars and make a universe and do all the things that God has done. In matters of degree, it's possible that I can be just totally awesome, wonderful, and highly valuable, but I'm just a speck of dust in a universe made by a God who himself is unfathomably amazing. And so the humility comes in recognizing the degree of difference. It doesn't come from having to find some way of knocking myself down and turning myself into somebody who's just, swamp scum. That's me, There's no need for us to even go there. It's important for us to not think of ourselves more highly than we ought to. We ought to just think of ourselves as highly as we ought to. I'd suggest you do that. Abusers also blame you for their anger. If you've got somebody abusing you, they're going to blame you're the reason why they're angry. Does that sound familiar in this concept of particularly the eternal torment God? He's pissed. He's angry. Well, why is he angry? Does he have issues? No. He's angry at you. He's angry at you because all these things you have done. And he's angry. Well, you know what? I'm a dad. And I would be lying if I were to ever tell you that I've never been angry at all. I would be lying if I were to tell you I've never been angry at myself. I'd be lying if I told you I was never angry at my wife or angry at my children. But, I will tell you this. I accept 100% of the responsibility for my anger. The anger that I feel is what I feel in light of how I'm perceiving things and in light of how I value things. And so I do think that anger is a perfectly legitimate and wonderful, realistic experience. If you have really good reason for being angry, the only healthy thing you can do is be angry. Thankfully, life isn't full of all sorts of things where we're justified in being angry all the time. Some people are angry all the time, though, because that's what works for them, they think. But when people blame you for their anger, there's something abusive in that. There really is. Anger, it can be a very difficult thing to deal with, particularly even when it's honest and legitimate. But people who are honestly angry in a healthy way know that the reason I am angry is because I have values. And if I didn't have values, I wouldn't be angry. So when I am angry, I remind myself, I'm glad I have values. To me, the anger is a confirming thing. It's there's things I value, and those things I value are being violated, and that bothers me. Okay, good to know that. It helps me to understand how I feel about the things that I value. But I'll tell you what, when I'm angry, that's my problem. If I'm angry at my daughter, I may have to deal with her about some issues or something. But at the same time, the issues that I need to deal with her about are something other than the way I feel about them. So I don't want to hold her responsible for the fact that I might be angry. That's not her problem, and I don't want to turn it into her problem. And I would say that this theology that we have of a God who, I'll tell you what, I can't imagine how God could love us as he does and not from time to time be very, very disturbed about how things are going. But at the same time, that's because he loves us. And the anger that he would have to in some way be his own. And but abusers want to make you feel responsible. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be angry. Well, if I'm sorry. You have to own your own values as your own, and you have to own the way that that value is going to collide with reality as being part of what you've chosen. It's part of the package deal. And when you are not an abuser, you accept responsibility for how you feel as it being a response of your own, in your own, as your own experience, as a result of the way you are perceiving the world around you and the way that you value the things that are in the world around you. And you have nobody to blame. Not that blame is even appropriate, but the whole reason why you feel the way you feel is because that's the way it goes for you if these are the things you value. So I don't perceive God, to be honest with you, as somebody who's kind of holding us responsible for why he's so angry. That's abusive. And we need to free ourselves from that. So I do think there's even room for God to be very disappointed, very angry in ways. But I'll tell you this, when you've known somebody who can be very mature and angry, it's a weird experience. I remember having had that one time when I was talking to somebody who I had radically disappointed. The person was very angry, visibly angry with me. I could tell they were angry. But when they came to me, they wanted to know what they could do to help me so that I could appreciate and understand what I had done and the impact it had. And they didn't want to put upon me any of their anger. They just wanted to solve the problem. And let me tell you, that was a powerful experience. It was, I think, the first time in my life that I saw anger as possibly a very, really legitimate experience. And of course, the Bible even tells you, be angry and sin not. What do you do with angry? You feel it. You have it. What do you do with it? You don't have to do anything with it. It'll work itself through. Of course, if you're always angry, there may be something wrong in your expectations, what have you. But nonetheless, the point being, we don't need to blame others for the way we feel. We feel the way we feel because that's how our value system collides with the way we're perceiving how things are going. And that's all there is to it. And if there's any problem, we have to deal with what people are doing, not necessarily how we feel about it. Those are two different problems, two different issues. Another sign of abusers is this. A lot of abusers will also abuse animals. Now, this is starting to get real close to this concept of atonement. The atonement came out of an animal sacrifice. The idea that these animals, the goats and the sheep, were sacrificed as a substitute. Now, if I'm going to be honest, I think that to ancient man, struggling with this concept of what do we do with our sense of guilt, I can understand how the scapegoat concept can help, can work, or at least seem like a good idea. But in the end, it really doesn't work. As you see, the one problem that even the Bible talks about, well, the problem with all these sacrifices, there's no end to it. It's very short-lived. It just doesn't help at all. And so there's something that's odd that's going on here. Now, let me also put a little card out on the table, and some of you may not like hearing this, and some of you might appreciate it, but I'm of the opinion that there are enough problems in the Bible that I see when I read it. I see the presence of God involved in what's going on, but I also see the contamination of human response also wrapped up in it. So I'm looking at a story that unfolds. That as it unfolds is not all that clear. What's going on here? And it's led me to a way of understanding the history of the law that finally came up to the point of the coming of Christ. It's given me this theory. It's just a theory now. I can't entirely prove it, but it's a suspicion. I get the impression that ancient man reaching out to God doesn't really understand what to do. And I think that ancient man really was at a point in our development as a race where this concept of law really made sense, and where this concept of animal sacrifice really made sense or seemed to. And I get the impression that the God of heaven saw this as an opportunity to move in. And that as he moved in, he came to us, as it were, wearing a mask, coming to us in the way we would have expected him to come. And so the phase of law and the phase of animal sacrifice and all this was really, let's get started on the basis that you think is going to work. And then as the old covenant works its way through, God brings in various elements that demonstrate it isn't working, it isn't going to work, and that there really are other principles that really are at work, and that there are prophecies of something different coming, a new heart to be planted in you, a new covenant that will be coming, a suffering servant, whatever. And then finally Christ comes, and really there's a sense here when Christ comes, off comes the mask, and we see someone very different from what we saw before. And some of that old mask, that stuff that made sense, involved a concept of God that was, well, to a naive human race, was unknowingly very abusive. Now, I think that most people, when they come out of problems and difficulties, spiral out of them. It's very rare that you find somebody with some serious problems, they come to realize something, and then wham, bang, the next minute, they're perfectly fine, wonderful, mature people. That doesn't happen. It kind of, you're in process. You work your way out. And so I think that in some ways, the abuse that may have been part of this old covenant was actually, well, not as bad as the abuse they were in before they had the covenant, but it was somewhat abusive. And I don't think it was a real revelation of God. It was really just a starting point in the relation. It kind of, make contact, develop some empathy, some trust, and then let's work and see if we can shift some paradigms here over time. Other things that happen in this process of abuse. Not only do abusers tend to abuse animals, abusers are also often people who will isolate you from authority figures. I got some messages coming in here, so I want to see what's going on. Well, that's one I can't take. It's somebody else talking to me right now. So, see, this live show is being done through Skype as well, and so sometimes I get other Skype contacts coming in. Anyhow, so that's what that's coming. Okay, now let's see. Here we go. And Joey's trying to talk to me. I was also getting other things, Joey. Joey says, no, it's me. But yeah, I got contact requests coming in and stuff like that. Anyway, excuse me while I talk to my producer. Leslie, by the way, thank you, Leslie, is saying that she appreciates the way I'm handling all this. And a comment, I believe that increasing anger is a sign of decreasing patience. Well, I totally agree with you. Anger is an appropriate response to one's values being violated. It's an appropriate response to seeing things that you perceive as unjust. But it's really a way of coming to homeostasis. It's not a way to live. And not only that, but when it comes time to act, we have to act on the problems as they are and the causes as they are, and the anger just gets in the way. So an angry response is just a way of coming to terms with where our values are at in light of things that are happening. And I think that the more we take responsibility for our feelings, the quicker our anger resolves. And so, increasing anger, definitely, I'd have to agree with you, is very much a problem. Um, okay, and Joey, I'm going to leave it there so that if you talk to me more, I'm not seeing the other things coming in. So there you go. But love you, Joey. You're an awesome guy. I appreciate it. Help me keep this thing running. Anyhow, other concepts of abuse that I think that we need to consider that are known to be a part of abuse. The abusers tend to isolate you from other authority figures, and they want to do this because they don't want anybody getting in the way of the control they're gaining over you. Now, many times I think we present God as a Lord who is trying to take control of our lives. He's got a will for your life, and you have to, before you move to the left or to the right, you have to inquire with him. I think that Jesus has made it very clear that as Lord, he has no intention of lording it over us or behaving like other lords. Not only that, but if one looks in the Bible, I get the impression that the lordship, as it were, is in some ways just an analogy, and that it says that he's going to do this until all things are restored. I get the very strong impression that, once the redemption is complete, we don't need this lordship kind of thing. And I see it more as an analogy, and the analogy is no longer needed. I mean, Jesus is also called a healer. Well, once everybody's well, you don't need a healer anymore. But, what's Jesus going to do? How is he going to continue healing? You see, well, it's a short-lived phase of what's going on. Got another comment here. If you agree with that, then how can you believe that anger is ever right? If I agree, okay. How do you reconcile what Paul says that love is always patient? Patience is a behavior. It's a strategy. It's a way of responding. Anger is a feeling. I don't believe that anger is ever a call to behavior. It's a call to perhaps stop and reflect. Let's see, let me just make sure I'm reading the comment correctly. If you agree with that, then how can you believe that anger is ever right? Well, I think there are many times when anger seems inappropriate, but from my study of human development, I believe that all of our emotions, all of them, are a response to our perception based upon our focus, based upon our state of health, and our capacity to perceive reality. I believe that those four things combined are always responsible for precipitating our emotions. And therefore, I believe it's not possible to ever have any emotion that is wrong or inappropriate. I do believe that it is possible to have a very unhealthy perception. And a very unhealthy perception is going to certainly precipitate emotions that we might perceive as unhealthy. But I think that what we're doing is we're greasing the squeaky wheel, or dealing with the problem where it manifests itself, but not dealing with the problem where it is. The real problems of our lives do not come from how we feel so much as they come from how we're perceiving things, what our expectations are, what our focus is. For example, a very critical person. A very critical person may be making criticisms of some things that are where they're totally correct about everything that they're criticizing. This is wrong and that's wrong. And yeah, maybe it's all wrong. But I'll tell you what, they're also choosing a focus where those are the kinds of things they tend to notice. They don't notice the things that are right. Their focus is out of balance. And so although one might say, well, they've got a problem of always being irritated, I would say, no. They don't have a problem of always being irritated. They have a problem of always focusing on the negative, and the result of that, the consequence of that, is that they're always irritated. And so I perceive emotions as an involuntary and therefore amoral. There's no morals about it. I see emotions as an involuntary response to the sense we make of things through our perspective, specifically precipitated by what we choose to focus on, which includes what we choose to ignore, and then modified some by our state of health and also by our capacity to perceive. I mean, you can't have feelings about things you don't know about and don't understand. You can have frustrations that you don't understand because you see something that you at least perceive as something you don't understand and feel frustrated about. But ultimately, I see emotions as something radically misunderstood, and I don't think it ever helped. I think it's part of what makes us neurotic and unhealthy in our culture is that we're always trying to fix feelings. No, 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 no. I think if you can fix your perception, if you can fix your focus, if you can develop a balance in that, keep your health proper, you're going to do just fine. And all those feelings will kind of, when your perception changes, the way you feel automatically changes without you having to do anything about it. By the way, although I'm getting off topic, I like this question, and so I'm going to continue to even talk about this just a little bit more here. An example: suppose that I'm talking to someone, and I'm just having this conversation, and then they say something, and I take offense at it. They say something, and it bothers me, and I'm feeling angry, feeling a little hurt. And I'm struggling to respond with graciousness. Maybe I'm even deciding to draw a little line if I need to. And then they say something that makes me realize, you know what? I completely misunderstood them. I was being offended at what I thought they meant. And now I realize they didn't mean that. Now, let me ask you, once I make that realization, what happens to my offense? What do I have to do about it? Absolutely nothing. It will dissipate on its own. Now, if I harbor it or if I avoid embracing the reality that I feel it, it can also get buried that way. So I really perceive emotions as things that we should just always embrace, always own them, and realize that nobody ever makes me feel the way I feel. Ever. I am always 100% responsible for my feelings, always. And the reason is this: nobody chooses my perspective but me. Nobody chooses my focus but me. Without regard to why my health is the way it is, it's my health. Without regard to what my aptitude or IQ or ability to perceive is, that's where I am at, and it is my lot in life or whatever, and I have to own it as mine. And so when it comes to all the four things that cause our emotions to be what they are, every single one of them is my responsibility. I cannot blame anybody for anything that I feel. And as long as I own that, it never has to enter into why I'm dealing with somebody. Now, if somebody's doing something repeatedly that I find is always making me angry, I don't know that there's anything I have to do about the anger, but there may be something I need to do about what they're doing, and I can approach that as a separate issue. Particularly if I own the anger as mine, I don't have any need to kind of deal with them with the anger. It just isn't. It's not a problem. And once you develop that kind of an attitude, you get to the point where you realize it is an honor to be angry, because to have values that you really believe in, when they're violated, it's a cost that, if that's the cost of having value, I'll pay that. Sure. It's a privilege to be offended. It's a privilege to be angry. And so consequently, it isn't even a problem. I don't even have to solve it. If I'm angry, I'll be angry and sin not. Well, anyway, that's my little diatribe about emotions. Maybe someday we'll have to do a whole show where I discuss how I came to that philosophy of emotions. Anyway, back to the abusers. Those people that make me angry. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, I have other comments here. How can we be responsible for our emotions if they are involuntary? Well, that's very good. I'm not responsible for my emotions. I'm responsible for my perspective. I'm responsible for my focus. I'm responsible for my health. I have to own my aptitude as mine. And so I don't, if I handle these things that precipitate emotion, then I'm responsible for my emotions, not directly, but indirectly. They are, in some ways, it's kind of like this. I'm not responsible to make my tomato plants create tomatoes, but I might be responsible for planting the tomato plants. I might be responsible for tilling the garden. But you know what? There's a sense here in which the tomato plants have got their own job to do, and I can't make them grow tomatoes. I can just provide them with a good garden. And there's a sense here in which, right, I'm not responsible directly for my emotions because they are involuntary, but I am totally responsible for the factors that work together to precipitate them. But once those factors are in place, the emotions are going to be what they're going to be, and you can't change that, nor can I, and that is involuntary. More comments. I think Paul also says that love is not angry. Love isn't, but that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as angry. I mean, financial responsibility doesn't have anything to do with a chocolate cake. They're two different things, and I think that love is not an emotion. Love is anger is, and love is not angry. But at the same time, I don't think that Paul is saying that love never has anger. I think that what he's I think when he was talking to Peter after he got up from the table there when the people from Jerusalem came up, I get the impression Paul was a little angry. But I think when it says that love is not angry, I think that's just a phrase that's really saying that when love is angry, it doesn't perceive you, the one loved, as responsible for that anger. So it's not the way that love relates. But if love is not angry, and that the Bible says be angry and sin not, somehow we're trying to push things into some sort of unworkable extreme. But that's a good question, and we need to kind of. It says here, though some translations say not easily angered. I don't think anger makes sense. Well, when you're not going to take responsibility for the fact that you're angry as a result of your own perceptions and focus, then I think there's no way to avoid it. But also, if you're not going to have an honest focus, if you're not going to have an honest perception, you're going to be inappropriately angry as a result. If our values are violated, is anger the best response? Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think that when it comes to responses of our emotions that we should ever try to choose them. Let your feelings be what they are and own them as your own. But I think that the more we try to control them, the deeper we get into trouble. I think what we need to do is control our behavior, control our focus, control our perspective, and recognize that the way we feel about these things is our problem, not anybody else's. And but don't choose your feelings, because you try to push yourself into a box, and that's gonna explode on you someday. But I'll tell you this. I think if you do have a good focus, I think if you do have a perspective, that'll lead to, I would wonder, being a generally pleasant person most of the time, because it's a wonderful world. People are beautiful. Things are awesome. And if you just look at and see and open your eyes to all those other things instead of all the things that you're worried about and insecure about, it's not going to be a problem. I got more comments here. Lots of good comments. Can we be offended without being angry? I sure. Sometimes I'm offended by something somebody does that I realize they haven't got a clue what they're doing, and maybe don't even mean to do it. Maybe they themselves are going through something horrible. I've been offended sometimes by somebody who just, went through a death in their family, and they don't realize just how the things they're saying. And you're not going to be angry at that. I mean, these people are hurting, and in a sense, they've lost control of themselves, and what they need is help, empathy, and care. There are times someone says here that clearly that anger is the best response. How can our children know that something is wrong unless they see that we are upset or troubled about it? I don't think that we should hide the truth is, the more your children understand that you don't hold them responsible for how you feel, the more freedom you'll actually have to share with them how you do feel, particularly when they understand, okay, I did this and I did that, and Dad is really angry, but Dad wants me to just deal with what I did, and he's going to deal with his anger. I think that can, in fact, as I shared with the experience that I had with that one person, I discovered this real power. When you're dealing with somebody whose behavior is in some ways inappropriate, And they know that you're angry, and yet they know that you also love them and care them and value them. And they know that you're responding in a way where you do want to hold them responsible for what they did, but you're not in the least holding them responsible for your anger. Sometimes it's very disarming. And you know what? I guess I can take responsibility for what I did as long as I don't have to also make you feel better. That I'm going to have to make you feel better. That's a noose around my neck I don't want, because the truth is this: people are as miserable as they decide to be. And if I'm going to start accepting responsibility to make you feel better, that's not a good direction to go in. It's not going to work. Okay, yeah, right. There's several here. If our values are violated, is anger the best response? You go, Bob. I'm really loving this discussion about psychology. Very exciting. Yeah, thank you. My degree, by the way, is in human development, and we had to study all this stuff. There are clearly times when anger is the best response. I missed a couple. I guess I'm just going to have to move on. The one tech comment: I believe that anger is involuntary, but we are responsible for how we choose to deal with our anger. That is true. Absolutely. I think the best response is education. Yeah, before you do anything, have you stopped to think, is what I'm going to do going to be helpful or not? And if it's not, do you care that what you're doing is going to be helpful or not? And if you don't care, who are you to be angry at somebody else? That just doesn't make sense. That's kind of insane. Anyhow, back to this concept here of abuse, and let's see if we can wrap some things up. As the abuser seeks to control you, the abuser has unrealistic expectations. And in fact, they're setting you up for failure. Sometimes our concept of what God wants from us is setting us up for failure. That makes us all the more beholden to him, until finally we end up in a relationship with God where somehow he's got us under his thumb and we're just such worms. And what else are we going to do? And it really becomes a Stockholm syndrome, particularly when we notice that personalities of people who are abusive tend to be like dual personalities. They can be so wonderful to you when you're complying, and absolutely difficult, witchy, and all sorts of other things. They can be despotic, and they can definitely show you the whim of their decisiveness when they're not happy with the way things are going. There's this Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality. And we sometimes, this God who loves you unconditionally, but if you don't receive him, he's going to burn you in hell forever. This concept of interpreting the Bible in this way is just not going to work for us. I want to, next week, talk specifically about some of the verses that are used to try to turn the Bible into this ultimate authority in our lives, instead of something that is an extremely useful text that reveals to us the history of what was going on with the introduction of Christ and where this gospel comes from, and a text that can be very, very useful. So next week I want to go into some of those very specific verses. But let me bring this back, though, to the theme that I'm trying to work on here: spirituality, responsibility, and an appropriate view of the Scripture. I really believe that in many ways we need to accept responsibility. And yet the responsibilities we need to accept need to be well thought through. Like someone said here already about education. We need to make sure that we're not accepting responsibility for things that we really don't possess any ability to respond to, for things that are really a problem that belong to somebody else. But we need to find an honest and thought out concept of our personal responsibility, and then own it and take it. And it's not really all that bad. It really isn't. In fact, it can be very liberating and free to do so. And it's not even really a matter of bondage in any manner. It's as it says, that you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Okay, this is your problem. Now that you know that, you can work with it and deal with it and stop running from it, and work with it the best that you can. Now, with these abusive concepts, in many ways, an abusive relationship with the text an abusive relationship with God, where God gets to be the abuser, is actually something that is counter-spiritual, counter to living loved, and it is counter to being responsible, because we spend too much of our time walking on eggshells trying to make sure that the scriptures haven't been violated or broken, and that God isn't angry, and that I'm not going to get cut off from my blessings today, and things like that. That it really gets in the way of our living truly responsible, and that's such an important part of how we're relating to God. As we close out today, let me thank you for your time. Thank you for so many of your comments. They were encouraging as well as interesting, and I would want you to know that in the end, there is a way of coming to God, a way of embracing what's going on in Scripture, a way of taking all the hyperbole out of this and finding ourselves in a situation where we don't always understand everything, and we don't have to, but where there is peace, where it's okay, where you can trust that the God of heaven is not going to be doing wrong. There aren't going to be any she-bears coming out of the woods to take you down for things that you just really shouldn't have done and your foolishness. Bad things can certainly happen because life is risky, but you can live loved. And there is a way of coming to terms with all this without having to give in to all of this hyperbolic abuse that in the end leaves us feeling so victimized by a God we have to say he's loving, but deep down inside we are terrified and scared of what's going to happen if anything goes wrong. Don't get Daddy upset. He's not pleasant when he's upset. That is not the kind of relationship that you need with God, and that's, I assure you, not the kind of relationship God is trying to have with you. Till next week, this is Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor, and I will see you next week for another teaching. Thank you for your time. Bye now.